Ladies and gentlemen, as president of the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, I welcome you to this critical discussion. Front of package warning labels have proven to be a powerful tool in the fight against obesity and diet-related non-communicable diseases. They are supported by WHO and PAHO, and in the Caribbean, the CARFA 6-point package, National Ministries of Health, and at the highest levels of the heads of government. So globally, we are seeing a major momentum in the introduction of front of package warning labels. A global review in Frontiers in Public Health highlights that over 40 countries have introduced front of package labeling, with 16 of them mandating it. So let's start relatively nearby. In Chile, a pioneer in implementing octagonal warning labels on foods high in sugars, sodium or salt, and saturated fats. Since its implementation, consumer behavior has positively shifted, leading to healthier choices and reduced consumption of harmful foods. Chile's successful implementation of octagonal warning labels on unhealthy foods has really inspired similar measures worldwide. For instance, leading to decreased consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages. And also, we have Mexico's mandatory warning labels, which were introduced in 2020, which resulted in product reformulations and a decrease in the purchase of high-calorie snacks. Later on again, 2 years later in 2022, Brazil adopted similar mandatory labeling, reflecting a growing global momentum. So the mounting global scientific evidence, free of conflicts of interest, in support of front of package labeling, excess black warning labels are the most effective labeling tool to empower consumers to quickly, correctly, and easily identify foods high in nutrients of public health concern, including sodium, sugars, and saturated fats. And I want to repeat that message so that it resonates to everyone on this call, because, quite frankly, this is what we're all about discussing this morning. The mounting global scientific evidence, free of conflicts of interest, in support of front of package warning labels is clear. Octagonal high-end excess black warning labels are the most effective labeling tool to empower consumers to quickly, correctly, and easily identify foods high in nutrients of public health concern. So we also have Caribbean research, again, free of conflicts of interest. A randomized controlled trial in Jamaica showed that octagonal warning labels are the most effective labels in helping consumers identify products high in sugars, sodium, and unhealthy fats. But the journey has not been easy, and despite this evidence and global progress, we've had some major challenges in the region, and in the Caribbean is still yet to approve a standard containing the octagonal warning label guided by strong nutrient profile models. The Healthy Caribbean Coalition and the national civil society organizations such as the Heart Foundation of Jamaica and the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Barbados, as well as our very animated and very vocal youth advocates from across the region, have been working with regional and global public partners such as PAHO, CARFA, the University of the West Indies, UNICEF, and FAO, advocating for front of package warning labeling. So at this very critical moment in CARICOM, after repeated rejections of the front of package warning label in the face of strong industry opposition, the Healthy Caribbean Coalition and partners felt it critical to showcase the rapid global progress in support of octagonal warning labels and the lessons that can be learned. We really hope that this webinar will bring greater clarity about the need and the appropriateness of octagonal warning labels and inspire CARICOM countries really and regional actors to push ahead with the octagonal warning labels as a public health measure, guided by public health objectives above all. And again, I'm going to be repetitive on that by saying guided by public health objectives above all. So today we are delighted to welcome a very dynamic panel of experts. My job here is really minimal. These are the guys who are going to be doing the heavy lifting. And they're going to share current evidence and lessons learned, underscoring the efficacy of octagonal warning labels and the critical importance of a robust nutrient profile. We'll begin with a global review and then zoom right into country experiences from Barbados. Yes, there is a bias. And from some other Caribbean countries and partners, including the United Kingdom, Canada, and Mexico. We will also hear experiences from Africa and where there's progress as countries seek to take strong policy action to tackle unhealthy diets. So as I wrap up this very brief welcoming remarks, let us remember that octagonal front of package warning labeling is really grounded in scientific evidence that's free of conflicts of interest. It is rooted in the fundamental right for health. It is accessible, it's easy to understand, it's equitable policy measure, and evidence has shown its introduction has significantly reduced the burden of NCDs and long-term cost savings associated with the reduction of both NCDs and obesity. In this year of the 4th UN high-level meeting on NCDs, as we take stock, our actions as advocates and policymakers must be really people-driven, but policy-leveled, inspired by the realities faced by Caribbean people, including living in highly obesogenic environments. A child living with obesity, the young adult with the early onset type 2 diabetes, again, usually secondary to obesity, and the father really coping with hypertension, as well as a grandmother facing the ongoing battle of cancer. We must demand healthy food environments, and labeling is a foundation policy measure. With effective labeling, we empower consumers to make informed decisions, driving demand for healthier options and prompting reformulation of products. It's really a win-win public health and sustainable development measure. I invite you all over the next 2 hours to join us in the Healthy Caribbean Coalition and our partners as we champion this cause and ensure that there are robust policies that prioritize health. And I thank you. So with those very brief welcoming remarks, I'm going to let you relax, hopefully get some steps in and get some hydration in. And I'm going to just briefly overview our panel, which should be up on your screen because it's up on my screen. I am the Healthy Caribbean Coalition President Kenneth Connell. You've just heard me really try to drive home the point for evidence-based measures that are people-centered. Fabio Gomez is here, a nutrition and physical activity specialist with the Pan American Health Organization. Fabio, I know that you have got training shoes on and you're getting some steps on as we speak on this webinar. Dr. Nadia Flexner is the Associate Director of Research of the Global Health Advocacy Incubator. Welcome, Nadia, virtually. And Dr. Simon Barkera, who is the Director of Nutrition, Health, and Research Center at the National Institute of Public Health, Mexico, and the President of World Obesity Federation. And a good friend of mine. Simon, welcome. Dr. Arthur Phillips, who is joining me almost right across the street here in Barbados. Dr. Arthur Phillips is the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Dr. Celine Awar. And Celine, please correct my pronunciation, Awar, if I have pronounced it incorrectly. I'm so accustomed calling you Celine. But she is the Chief Executive Officer of International Institute of Legislative Affairs in Kenya. We'll be speaking soon, very soon. And Dr. Chris Van Tolliken, who you must know him. If you don't, you need to Google him and go on to many of his social media sites on advocacy for a healthy food policy. But wearing his academic hat, as we must do from time to time, he's the associate professor at UCL. And Chris, I am told that as a King's College man, I can only refer to your institution as the institution on Gower Street. And of course, the kind of the gel that keeps this all together is Mrs. Maisha Hutton, the Executive Director of the Healthy Caribbean Coalition. So with those overview and introductory statements and introductions of our panelists, I am now going to pass it over to Danielle for a Mentimeter activity, just to get you involved as the important audience. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Connell, and good morning, everyone. Danielle Walwyn, I'm the Advocacy Officer at the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, as well as lead of our youth arm, and I'm very excited to get a sense of where everyone is at. We have a very important topic to cover today, and we have 2 questions for you. So I'm inviting everyone to scan the QR code, and we'll also pop a link into the chat that you can use to access the Mentimeter. So we'll wait a minute or so for everyone to get logged in, and then we do have 2 questions that we'd like for you to answer. So great to see so many people from across the globe joining, and so we're keen to hear your thoughts. Okay, we do have quite a few people signing in. Great. So again, you can feel free to scan the QR code and also use the link that has been placed in the chat. Okay, we will go ahead. So our first question, what front of package label do you think is best supported by evidence? So assuming that you all might have a sense of what these look like, there's a slight description in within each option. So it seems like we have a potential winner there. All right, so we have some other responses coming in. Really did want to get a sense of where everyone is at on this subject. Great. So the winner so far, octagonal front of package warning labels. So just the label that Dr. Connell would have referenced in his remarks. Okay. In the essence of time, I'm going to move over to the next question, which will require some further thought about why you think this label had the highest response rate. Welcome your thoughts and your reflections. Strongest evidence, easy to read, simple, straight to the point. I think some keywords, and Dr. Connell, keen to hear from you, and maybe we can reflect on it in the closing remarks. Simplicity, most popular type, visibility, clear message, easy to see and interpret and guides consumers away from harmful products, clear and concise. I think we're seeing some common words here. Easy, simple, straightforward. It's eye-catching, brief, and easy to read for the consumer. Friendly, rights compliant. Sort of in your face, no key to really follow. Best visibility on packaging. Attractive. Excellent. Thank you all so much. I think we're seeing some common themes here. And so we can, maybe I can invite our panelists and even you to reflect on this as we're moving forward throughout the webinar. And with this, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Maisha Hutton, our Executive Director, to give an update on front of package warning labeling in the Caribbean. Maisha?
Thanks, Danielle. Also wanted to echo those comments about so happy to see so many individuals from across the globe. We normally have a very Caribbean audience, and it's great to see participants from all over Latin America and outside of the Caribbean. So I'm going to give everyone a quick overview. This is a brief presentation about the CARICOM FOPL process. This is quite a busy slide, but I'm going to draw your attention to a few key milestone events. But just starting on the left, began in 2017 when PAHO arranged for a technical cooperation between CARICOM and Chile, for CARICOM to really learn about what Chile was doing then. And you heard about what Chile was doing in Kenneth's opening remarks, the first country to introduce the octagonal warning label. And out of that, CARICOM took a decision, and in particular CROSSQ, which is the regional standards body, to revise the regional standard for the labeling of prepackaged foods to include the octagonal warning label and the PAHO nutrient profile model. And that really triggered a process of national consultations to ensure the language was correct, that there was consensus around the language, and that led up to a regional vote. So over this process of consultations between 2018 and up to 2025, we had extensive national level consultations, really trying to inform all key stakeholders and engage as many stakeholders as possible. Civil society was working to ensure that the public was aware that there was building support for the octagonal warning label. Evidence was being used to guide that process. And importantly, the process was being held to account. And there were also a number of joint campaigns held at the regional level to, again, build public support and policymaker support. Also, there were actors within the industry who were opposing the octagonal warning label and the PAHO nutrient profile model. Over the course between 2019 and 2020, we had an important regional study that was done, and Kenneth would have spoken about this. And this was really critical because it now meant that not only did we have global evidence, but we now had regional evidence. So in 2021, we had our first regional vote. This is where member states determined by country whether or not they were in support of the standard. And unfortunately, the standard was not approved in that first round. We reached a 66% positivity rate, but the threshold was 75%. So CROSSQ had to send the standard back out for consultations across the region. Around the same time, the Caribbean Private Sector Organization conducted their own study. It was officially approved by the COTED, and the COTED is the kind of regional arm of ministers of trade. And a really important point about COTED is CROSSQ sits under COTED, and this is why we have this box here, that this whole standards process is essentially, it's very much skewed towards trade. So back here to the CPSO study, it was approved by the COTED, it was completed in 2022 and presented jointly to ministers of health and trade. And in 2022, importantly as well, a number of regional public sector actors, HCC, PAHO, CARFA, UNICEF, University of the West Indies, the OECS Commission came together and submitted a joint statement to the joint COTED-COSOD, really calling into question the study on the grounds of conflict of interest and methodological flaws. So kind of some really milestone events leading up to and around that first vote and going back out to consultation. And the statement and these concerns were shared with key actors. In 2023, we had another vote, and the vote failed again with a lower positivity rate. And decision was taken at this point to remove the octagonal warning label and the PAHO nutrient profile from the standard altogether. And the standard was then approved without the warning label in October 2024 by the COTED. In 2025, CROSSQ again, really trying to advance this process and pick it back up, decided to propose a new option for the FOPL, and this is an embedded QR code. And this is where we are right now, essentially across the region. So the next slide really looks at what has HCC done over this short period to support or influence this process. This is an important report that we produced in March 2024 with partners at the O'Neill Institute at Georgetown Law, with the Law and Health Research Unit, And this really looked at the governance of the standards process and made recommendations to improve and strengthen governance, really in particular around safeguarding the process from industry interference. We submitted a letter to CARICOM, really detailing our concerns around the process, and again, highlighting those recommendations. We requested submission to the Joint COTED-COSOD, and we elevated this to the heads of government at the July 2024 annual Heads of Government Conference meeting. This year, we've also been meeting with CrossQ again around this new proposed model, this embedded QR code, and you can see a photo of that again, really sharing our concerns around this and the evidence which does not support it. And this evidence was shared with CrossQ and was also shared most recently with the chief medical officers. And then finally, just wrapping up, this is very much what's been happening at the regional level, our efforts regionally, but at a national level, many of our organizations have been still trying to push ahead with FOPL, and HCC has been supporting that national CSO-led advocacy. And we will continue to support and advocate for the introduction of best practice front-of-package warning labeling. So I'm going to stop there and hand back over to Kenneth.
Thanks, Maisha. Thanks for that excellent overview. You know, I always like to put these things in a practical perspective. And just briefly, yesterday I was at the supermarket with my mom, and I saw her struggling trying to read nutrient labels. I have to admit, she's probably more attuned to reading labels now than she was about 5 years ago. However, I kind of tongue-in-cheek said to her, wouldn't it be easy to just scan a QR code? Of course, she looked at me and said, well, first of all, I struggle even to use my mobile phone to make calls, scan a QR code to find out the nutrients. How about having something that's bold and there on the front of the package so I can actually see what it's saying and make a decision then? With those words, Fabio, the baton has been handed over to you. Running shoes on, take it from here.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. Great pleasure to be here. Thank you for organizing the webinar. And I'll be moving very fast, not intention to have a very comprehensive presentation of global trends, but giving some ideas of where the trends are going and how do we track them, not only from where they've been from the past now, but how we foresee them going to the future and how can we best shape them in ways that we can protect public health. So I always think it's important to start with the problem. We need to make sure that we understand how much the consumption of products that are harmful to health are affecting EU health globally. And if we just take these three risk factors here, we're talking about the cause of almost 1/3 of the deaths that occur globally. And it's not only deaths that lives that we're living for these deaths, but also quality of life that we're living, that we're losing. And if we just count the amount of time that people lost because they were in the hospital, they couldn't go to work because they were sick, they couldn't study or enjoy life the best way they can do. We just lost in 1 year, in 2021, in the world, 510 millions of years of quality life, just because of these three risk factors, which we know are intimately linked with the consumption of excessive amounts of sugars, fats, saturated fats, trans fats, and salt and sodium. And that's why the purpose of front-of-pack labeling has been clearly to help consumers easily identify the presence of these nutrients in excess in products. And we know it's not only to meet that purpose, we need to meet that purpose with a great effectiveness of the tool that we're using. And from Nobel Prize awarded science, we know since the 1970s, although they were awarded in 2002, that consumers do not engage in extended cognitive effort in purchase situations. They minimize both the error and the effort, and also minimize the time they take to make their purchase decisions, specifically and particularly when the decisions are repeated decisions, which is the case of food purchases. So we need to find systems that meet the purpose that we just discussed, easily help consumers to easily identify the products that are accessible, but also make it in ways that it is effective, easy, and quick. But if you will look into where the companies that produce these products are moving forward and take their policies, practices, and products in expanding their business, we see that every action and every effective policy, and this is a quote from one of the annual reports of ultra-processed product company, indicating that obesity, health-related concerns, they are all a matter of concern for the profitability of the company, in particular governmental regulations, showing that these companies, they will act and they will bring alternatives or policies that can be ineffective and can avoid affecting their profitability negatively. And this is important to understand because this will make and have us have a more clear understanding where the trends globally are going in terms of what these ultra-processed products companies propose. So that you often will see them moving into proposals that will bring systems that are ineffective or less effective than what we know as for the evidence. So we clearly know that GDA effects up front, this non-interpretive front of pack labeling system, they do not meet the purpose. They don't tell people if the product's excessive in the nutrients. In addition to that, the evidence also shows that they are ineffective in doing that and improving the purchase decisions. The same thing helps with endorsement logos. They might, in addition to not being work and meet the purpose, they might bring misleading interpretation for the consumers and serve as a claim to promote products that actually should be reduced. And of course, creating new barriers for the consumers to access that information easily. And this is where QR code and created and supported mainly by corporations manufacturing ultra-processed products came up with the ideas as, well, maybe shall we not just not have the easy information and make it through QR codes or other use of technologies. But what the evidence says is, and this is one study that the European Commission has convened to understand how the QR code is used and how it helps consumers in making their decision in terms of food purchases. And what we see here is everything that goes against what the evidence requires us to have a front of pack labeling that is effective. So first, the study showed that the QR codes were scanned only by 24%, they were scanned only 24% of the time. And the other thing that they also found out is that the speed in which consumers make their decision, make their choice, was reduced. And here we have an increase of time. So that's what the line goes up, because it's increasing the time, the mean choice speed that consumers took to make their choice. That means we wanted that bar to go down, and it's going up when you make the use of the QR code. So we're slowing down consumers in making that, which is something that it's sort of obvious, but we have clear data to show that. There was also, from all the different findings of the report, they could conclude then that providing food information, I quote them here in the report, via QR codes rather than on paper labels has a negative impact on consumers. In addition to that, and following the evidence and the experience of countries and the concern with this replacement of front of pack labeling with QR codes, we have recently, last year, the Codex Committee to agree on a new guideline on the use of technology to clearly say that food information concerning safety and nutrition should not be provided exclusively using this sort of technology. Then what we really see meeting the parameters that we need for an effective front of pack labeling to work is what we find in the octagonal warning labels. So we know that they are quicker. It's not moving my slides. Oh, sorry, now it moved too quick. So we know that they are used. They are more. Oh my God! Can you see my slides?
We can't now, but you can just restart your presentation from that slide.
Yes.
Should be good to go.
It's just shut down.
PowerPoint has been doing this recently.
And I'll continue speaking then. So we have the clear evidence that the front of pack warning labels, they work quicker, easier. They also improve the understanding of the consumer more than other systems. In addition to meeting the purpose that we discussed previously, that is important for it to meet. And finally, results from pre-implementation, post-implementation studies indicate and demonstrate that they can change and improve the intention of purchase and actual purchase of products in reducing those that are excessive in critical nutrients. Just sharing here. So the trends, and this is something that is starting in our region, but is expanding to other regions in Africa and Asia. And we see, let me know if you can see now. And we can see how it expands to different countries as countries try to regulate products in ways that they can ease the implementation. The identification of these products by consumers. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can, Fabio. Great.
Okay, let me put in presentation mode. So as I was mentioning, it started expanding or originally from our region, but it's expanding into other regions. And the other thing that we see is moving forward is that beyond the recognition of the use of octagonal warning labels and other sorts of warnings in terms of identifying those products for consumers, we start to see also warnings for other ingredients that are important, such as the food and drink warnings that are required, for instance, already in the UK and other countries. And this brings us to the other purposes that countries are building on and expanding based on the evidence. There's undeniable evidence that ultra-processed products that have so many impacts in so many different tissues and systems of our human body. That is just that we can't ignore the fact that these products are affecting our health beyond the presence of excessive nutrients that they carry. So countries are also moving forward in expanding the warnings to populations so that they can meet and cover that. In some ways, they are doing that, like in Colombia, Argentina, and Mexico, including warnings that also consider additives that are associated with these ultra-processed products, but also using a nutrient profile model that can easily help them capture those products for regulation. And there's these scientific reports, Nature journal paper that was published showing results that with the PAHO nutrient profile model, you could capture ultra-processed products, more than 97% of the ultra-processed products, and more studies that we're doing, and Nadia and Chris will comment on that, have been showing how the Pan American Health Organization nutrient profile model is being able to help countries capturing these additional this category of product that is, in addition to the nutrients, need to be regulated for other reasons as well. The results we have from other countries that have implemented that are very robust in demonstrating that consumers have changed their purchase decision to a better decision. Even at the very first days of the implementation, for instance, in Uruguay, more than 58% of the consumers already have changed their purchase to a better one. We have objective data from sales in Chile showing that products that carry warnings, they have a reduced number of sales. Projections from Mexico showing that the reduction in prevalence of obesity and also the save in costs with obesity prevention due to that. And also a huge impact on the induction of reduction of ingredients of critical concern in products. These products, just as sold in the USA right now, if we were to apply octagonal warning labels, they will have these 4 octagonal warning labels. But the product that they export to Mexico, given the requirements there, have been changed in ways to reduce the amount of total fats and the amount of trans fats as well. The same thing in terms of other products, just to show how this induced the changes and how companies only change when there's a regulation to require that. You see, in the US, we had the original product with 607 milligrams of sodium. In Chile, this was reduced by 50%. But in Mexico, where we have the best practice in terms of the nutrient profile model and criteria, you see that there was almost less than half of the amount of sodium that you can find in that version in the US. Finally, we have seen and we have evidence that there has been no negative impact to the economies in countries that have implemented this policy. We have shown. Oh, thank you. We have shown evidence has demonstrated that there's not been any changes to employment rates. Next, please. And also no changes to wages in Chile, and the same results was found in Peru. Next slide. So you don't see any changes there. Next slide. And finally, I want to show these results from the US. I think it's really important to understand that not even the food industry is protected from obesity and its costs. And this study is really interesting, showing how much obesity is costing to food industry itself, and how much extra cost is due to the fact that we're not being able to take action to prevent this epidemic. And I'll close with the final slide, indicating the sense of urgency we have. We know that about 30 deaths a minute are happening globally, and we need to, and we have tools such as the front of pack warning label to help the population improve their diets and protect public health. So we need to take action sooner than later. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Fabio, and very well done, especially with the technical difficulties. I know Gloria also, thanks for helping out. And what we've been discussing so far is really behavioral change, not only for consumers who are ultimately patients and people living in the health environment, but also for industry. And behavioral change requires an enabling environment. I'm going to move on to the next presenter now, who is Dr. Arthur Phillips from the Barbados Ministry of Health and Wellness. He's the Deputy Chief Medical Officer. Arthur, I believe that you're a class of 99. I may be getting that wrong.
That is correct, Kenneth.
Ah, wow, there you go. Baton over to you, sir. My senior.
Okay, let's go. Good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for the opportunity to share some perspective on the experience in Barbados. So we've been on this journey pretty much from the beginning of the timeline that Maisha would have outlined, where there would have been discussions between Chile and CARICOM, the Country Corporation for Health and Development, and initial stakeholder consultations and on from there. So we just try to give a flavor of where we are and what we've been through. So in terms of context, certainly across the Caribbean and our experience in Barbados is that NCDs are our leading cause of death. 2023 stats suggest that NCDs are responsible for 83% of our deaths, and they are responsible for the majority of the preventable premature causes of death and the leading cause of morbidity as well. We've spoken about the fact that food, unhealthy food, is a significant contributor to many of our NCDs, and that food labeling can play a role in assisting individuals in understanding, being empowered, and ultimately in making healthier choices, and that the discussion is not a health discussion, but it is a whole of society discussion. It's a discussion that includes civil society, academia, industry, because ultimately it is in the interest of the entire society to ensure that we are supported on the journey toward health, achieving and maintaining health. So both Maisha and Fabio would have talked about the fact that there are different kinds of labels. Just flagging here the fact that warning labels are a particular group and have been shown to be particularly effective in assisting individuals, but there are other kinds of front of package labels that have been part of the discussion from time to time. At a very high level, if we summarize, and Fabio would have gone into this in some detail, the octagonal warning labels have been shown generally in the literature and specifically in the Caribbean region to be effective in supporting consumer behavior. They're the easiest to understand. They're the easiest to assist in decision making as well. But there are other kinds of labels, as I said, that have been considered and have been promoted by some of the stakeholders. The process officially in Barbados would have started coming out of the CARICOM request for the local standards mechanism to review the draft food labeling proposal, and we would have been, we being the collective stakeholders in Barbados, health, industry, etc., would have been part of the process of considering the proposal from CARICOM and in voting on that in a series of votes. In the initial vote, while Barbados would have voted in support of the FOPWL being included based on the PAHO nutrient profile, regionally there was not support, and subsequently the FOPWL would have been relegated to an informational annex, and then ultimately it would have been removed from the proposed standard. As we understand it, the current situation follows the call for a regional policy with specific FOPWL guidance. And at the beginning of this year, we understand CrossQ has been reaching out to member states and asking their opinion about a QR code. The QR code, of course, deals with a mechanism of getting information. It does not speak to what information is provided, how it is provided, etc. It is just around individuals can scan a QR code, and if they scan the QR code, they can then get information, and that information can be evidence-based, it can be diverse, etc. We understand that we are due to be officially asked about this possible way of moving forward, and we look forward to being approached and to sharing our view based on human health, based on evidence, based on our mandate to support development. There is to be a joint COTED COSOD meeting. I believe this was proposed for July. And I understand the intent from CrossQ is to present the stakeholders' views at that meeting. But ultimately, the mandate from COTED and COSOD coming out to the heads of governments in 2007 and subsequent meetings is around supporting human health, and that, of course, would be best guided by public health science, by evidence. In addition to the general evidence, the general body of evidence, the reviews, the individual studies from around the world, inclusive of the work in Jamaica, with the study comparing the different front of package labeling types. There is a modeling study that would have been done looking at the Barbadian context and comparing the introduction of front of package warning labels, the high-in, with not introducing them, and outlining the health impacts and the potential cost benefits as well. So this is part of what is guiding our understanding and our position on front of package labeling. So ultimately, from the perspective of Barbados, what the Ministry of Health would expect is that a position on front of package labeling would be evidence-based, and currently the octagonal labels are the ones that fit the evidence. Of course, the front of package labels are not a cure-all or a silver bullet. They are in the context of other measures which advance health, including taxes and policies and controls on advertising. So from a public health position, from a Ministry of Health standpoint, we will continue to champion science and to support labels that have been shown to work, continue to maintain engagement with our various stakeholders, including industry, continue to be part of the CARICOM process, and ultimately to advocate for a healthier future for the people of our region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arthur, for that presentation. I know that we are slightly behind time, although you kept to time, so well done. So I'm going to hand over to Simon for the next presentation on the FOPWL experience in Mexico or Mexico. Simon, how was that? How's my Spanish?
It's very good, Kenneth. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. And thank you, Kenneth, Maisha, Daniel, and all the group of the Healthy Caribbean Coalition. We are in Mexico great fans of your work, and congratulations on the advance on the policy. I am going to share my screen and talk you a little bit. Let me know if you can see it.
can see it clearly. Go right ahead.
Great, great. So I am going to talk a little bit about what we have seen in Mexico and how industry exploits and find loopholes in the front of package labeling regulation. So this is our experience in the topic, and just let me tell you briefly that when we design our warning labels using the experience from Pajo and from Chile, Uruguay, Peru, Ecuador, and other Latin American countries. After designing the policy, we received a recognition from United Nations for this labeling system, and the recommendation from the General Director of the World Health Organization was that he was saying that he wished that more countries would follow this example and adopt warning labels on processed foods and beverages. So I think it was a success from its design. However, we have been finding a very important opposition from food industry, and this opposition is translated to resistance, strategic legal challenges, and that seek to undermine the enforcement of labeling regulations. There is also a lot of narratives and a lot of ways in which they try to mislead and to limit and neutralize the impact of the warning labels in the products. And I must say that immediately after implementation of the warning labels, the multinational companies announced that they immediately reformulated. And this is one announcement that was just a few months after the announcement of the warning labels, in which some of the biggest multinational companies were saying that most of their portfolio was already reformulated. You can see here, this was also months after that, showing rates of very high rates of reformulation. And this is just to say that when they claim that they need a lot of time to adapt to these regulations, it's not really true. They can react immediately. And the other thing I want to show you is that in Mexico, in the first 2 phases of implementation of the warning labels, we have seen a lot of approval, comprehension, and use of the warning labels. So in population behavior, very good responses. Also, we have seen interesting effects on diet and health. We have seen change in purchases of ultra-processed foods, lower amount of calories consumed from soda, and more consumption of plain water, and less calories consumed. And also, we have seen effects on commerce and economics. And these effects have been, as I was mentioning, a massive reformulation with significant reductions in sugar, saturated fat, and sodium, and 5% more products without the warning labels. We have also seen 30% fewer calories purchased from ultra-processed products, and very important, no impact on the economy or employment rate, which is also one of the biggest arguments of corporations when they try to undermine these public health efforts. And just to show you here, we have conducted now studies of understanding and acceptance of the warning labeling systems. And what we saw is very similar to the Menti survey that we had at the beginning of this seminar, where the warning labels are the one that is more understand and more the one that is more accepted in different populations. And it was a study in almost 10,000 respondents from different countries in Latin America. Now, very briefly, let me show you this. That are one of the preliminary studies of Mexico in PubMed, in which we were able to show a reduction of about 6 to 8 grams of sugar in sweetened beverages only with the reformulation. This is per liter. So a very important reformulation. And we have seen with this implementation that also the daily sales of sugary beverages derived from the soda tax revenue have reduced after implementation. So we have evidence of reduced consumption and also of reformulation. And we are observing now reduction in triglyceride levels in Mexican adults, which are corresponding responding to these interventions. Now, talking about the loopholes, one of the most important is this double front packaging that industry created. So they have the warning labels in one face, but they put the back of the cereal box with exactly the same front package, and they do in the points of purchase the position of the placement of the product hiding the warning label. So this is very common, and this is something that we definitely need to solve now that we will have our first review of the norm. So this is important, and this is one of the things that other countries have been able to anticipate now that they have the Mexican experience. The other one is the creation or the design of products using new components such as allulose, lactase, and flavorings to try to skip or to mislead into not having the warning level. So, for example, they have these definitions as cotton candy flavor, for example. Instead of saying we added sugar, they said we added the flavor of cotton candy, or, for example, adding monk fruit flavor, and then with these arguments, skipping the warning labels. And this is something that we definitely also are going to fix. Other ways in which they cheat or mislead is when they announce the products online and they put only the brand and they hide the label or the package of the product, so you cannot see the labels. And this is something that is very common for online purchases. Another one was a very important effort by the industry to do legal protections, what we call in Mexico amparos, which was more than 100 companies. And this was all discussed by the Supreme Court in Mexico for years. And it needed a huge effort from civil society, academia, and the government to defend these warning labels and all what is around these warning labels. Other problem is with the reconstitution of products to avoid warning labels. So for example, sometimes propose a reconstitution that makes their products look a little bit better. For example, with these condiments to create soups, and also with concentrate. So they put pulp concentrate instead of saying we are adding sugar or sweeteners to the product, and that allows them to put zero added sugar. So we are working to fix that loophole. And the other one interesting is that they are calling the products as solid or liquid, depending of what is more convenient to them. So, for example, this is an ice cream, and they moved from declaring the portions in milliliters to declaring the portions in grams, and they can do whatever they want. And this can be easily fixed by defining products only as solids or liquids. Since the start in the norm. And other of the very important loopholes that we have seen is adding an undersized label that prevents fitting the warning seals despite the larger containers. So they put this, as you can see in this picture, very small label, and then they only put the number of warning labels, and it's very difficult to see. This has been fixed in other countries like Colombia and Argentina, and here is an example. The other thing is that in cylindric containers, the warning labels are aligned with the logo in the product that is in the right, and in our norm that was defined mostly for square or rectangular products, it was defined to be in the right side of the label. So we need to fix that also, and we have the opportunity to do that very soon. The other problem we have is that in Mexico, for some products, when there is reformulation, they can say in the label what was the reformulation, the positive reformulation. But that has created some very illogical labels. For example, this one, in which this product has two seals. One is high in sugar. So it has the seal of high in sugar, and at the same time, it has the claim that it is a product that is reduced in sugar. So we need definitely to fix it. This is a way to create confusion in the consumers. And then the other thing that we are exploring is to improve the visual recognition of our labels. We created 2 labels in Mexico, one warning that a product contains caffeine and other that contains artificial sweeteners and is not recommended for children. And these 2 labels have a very small size in many of the packages. So we are considering switching these legends to warning labels as the ones you can see here in the screen. And this is something that is going to be discussed. Also, to create a more weight for this kind of products. So, for example, one of the critics is that a yogurt or another type of products will have sometimes more warning labels than a soda. And in this case, we think the warning labels that we have are very powerful, but need to be clearly shown. And one of the last in the case of sodas is with very large labels. Also, we need to put the size of the warning labels in relation to the size of the label of the complete package. So you can see the example of Mexico in this 3-liter bottle of soda, how the proportion of the warning labels is small, and how this has been fixed in, for example, in Argentina. And then the use of characters in products with warning labels, which is forbidden in Mexico, but that in with different strategies, industry has been able to limit or to transform. So for example, using in some of the products the character as part of the brand, so they say it's not a character, it's the brand, or by reformulating in a way that doesn't show that they are having the warning labels, and then introducing the character. So this is something that we also are documenting and trying to improve. And just to say that one of the main battles we had was these claims of that these warning labels and the policy was not possible because of World Trade Organization limits and for different agreements, international agreements. And I need just to mention that in all the cases, Mexico won and is very clear in the World Trade Organization that when a country is defending the interest of health, there is no economic arguments that can push back this policy. So this is important for the Caribbean countries to know that these arguments are not strong enough to limit these policies. And we have documented this in different media, and the efforts have been from different countries to limit with trade arguments the warning levels, but in all the cases we have won. And just to close, there has been a counterbalance also from the civil society organizations, PAHO, UNICEF, government and academia to defend these policies in the Supreme Court. So until now, I think we have been successful with a lot of work just because we have been able to organize and to have a shared vision and a consensus on what we want in the country. And that way we have been able to defend this policy in the Supreme Court from the efforts of industry to neutralize it. So just to conclude, I think there are a lot of opportunities in Mexico to improve, and I hope you can take this experience to make a better policy. We think we need to review the specifications and definitions of our warning labels in things such as the cylindric products, the double front products, etc. Also to review critical ingredients and emerging substances that they are using just to cheat and to say that they are not adding artificial sweeteners or that they are not adding more sugar, when in fact they are doing things to just to change the definition and be able to have the product without the warning labels. Also, we are considering a few new warning label signs. So one could be ultra processed foods. The other one could be the identification of the genetically modified organisms and glyphosate containing products, which is something that is in our new food law, and we are seriously considering that this could be an additional warning label in some cases. And then the nutritional criteria. So we need to update the sodium threshold and keep pushing corporations to limit the amount of sodium and of other components. And finally, the portion standardization and reconstitution reporting, which has also some room of opportunity for industry to mislead and to neutralize the policy. So with that, I would like to thank you for the invitation, and I hope in the project of the Healthy Caribbean Coalition and in the projects of the different warning labels, you are able to update your policy to defend from this effort from industry. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Simon, and thanks for sharing the experience in Mexico. I know that we are behind time, so I just want to remind all participants to please be respectful to the audience and post your questions in the question chat, because we will not be able to entertain live questions. So moving on to Kenya, a bit far from Mexico, but Celine, I'm eager to hear the African countries' experience. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kenneth, and thank you to the entire team for inviting me to share our experience. I'm just going to put up my slides. Kenneth, can you confirm if you can see my screen, please?
I can now. You just need to hit presenters mode and we're good to go.
I've done that. I think let's see. Great. There we go. So thank you very much, Kenneth, Maisha, and colleagues for inviting me to share our experience from Kenya. And since we are here for the first time in this group, I just wanted to tell us a little bit more about ILA. So we are a not-for-profit organization, and our work is focused on engaging policymakers. And we do this through evidence-based advocacy, capacity building. We also do analysis and drafting of laws, as well as policies and media and communication. So at the moment, we focus on health governance, where we are looking at NCDs and injuries, and also tax justice and natural resource governance. And we are members of the Food Environment Policy Coalition. And what I'll be sharing here is what we have been able to do together with the coalition partners in Kenya. So the context we are operating in, I think, has also just common across from even the other countries that I've shared so far, is having a high increasing prevalence of NCDs, and our data at the moment is that up to 39% of deaths in Kenya are associated with NCDs, and more than half of the hospital admissions are as a result of NCDs. Then consumption of ultra-processed foods and that are easily available because of access and advertisement and marketing of these foods. And when we started this work, nation gaps in terms of not bringing all the stakeholders together, government ministries and departments, has also been shared by the other speakers. So the policy interventions that we're looking into include the nutrient profile model, and I'll be sharing a bit more about that. And out of that, then we are developing front of pack warning labels and marketing restrictions, as well as fiscal policies to provide tax are unhealthy to provide subsidies or opportunities to access healthier options. Then we're also looking at food procurement in public institutions, including schools. And then we also have trans fatty, industrially produced trans fatty acids, elimination of industrially produced acids from the food supply. So these are the policy interventions that are underway at the moment. And just sharing how this process has been. And Kenya started this journey around, I think, 2019 or 2020, thereabouts. And it started off from a voluntary-based front of pack nutritional labeling standard. And this led to the discussions that, we need to have a nutrient profile model first before we can have a form, set the thresholds that are set from the NPM. So that is how the process started. Then it was mostly led by government, and majority of the CSOs were not really much involved from that moment. So then the voluntary labeling standard was put on hold, and the process to develop a nutrient profile model started. And the draft that was initiated at that categories. It also had promoting a voluntary labeling system. It actually had colored labels, green and red. I will show them as we continue this discussion. Then later, there were a number of iterations of the draft, including then inclusion of another labeling system. Then we also did not have very clear position in as far as non-sugar sweeteners of CSO. So at some point, we were also looking at the having those discussions that countries in the PAHO region have that have just two food categories, liquids and solids. But eventually we just ended up with several food categories. There are actually 9, if I'm not wrong. So what the factors that enabled us to have the change in terms of strengthening the NPM that has set us on the route to front of pack warning label is that we had a strong leadership and coordination from MOH. And through that, there were established technical working groups across the different policy areas. So we have TWGs leading front of pack warning labeling. Another TWG is leading the work around marketing restrictions, fiscal policies, food procurement, trans fatty acids, and all that. So these TWGs are made up of various stakeholders from government, from CSOs, research, and they're able to discuss the issues through those TWGs under the coordination and leadership of MOH. And then we also had very strong evidence that was generated locally. So a number of them, evidence that informed this process, including ministry-led food listing, as well as our research partner in the coalition, EPHRC, did a testing of the different labels, testing the then proposed red and green labels, and provided evidence that, compelling evidence that moved us to adopting the high-in warning label in the NPM. Then we also have a strong coalition, and the coalition is leading in various areas, including advocacy, research, stakeholder engagements, as well as legal support. And then there's also a strong collaboration among stakeholders. And we also rode on the political opportunities and policy windows that we had. For instance, the commitment and dedication of Ministry of Health to adopt better and stronger food environment policies across those various work packages that I've just mentioned. And then we also have very strong support from international partners and communities. In community, we have WHO, UNICEF as participating actively and providing technical support, providing resources in the work that we do. So in terms of the milestones that we have achieved is that we have now adopted a nutrient profile model, and this NPM is evidence-based using the evidence that was generated by EPHRC informed that process. So it is based on the WHO Afro nutrient profile model, but customized and contextualized to Kenya and informed by the studies that have been done. And the NPM now sets the thresholds for nutrients of concern across the various food categories. And the thresholds of nutrients of concern that we have in our NPM include total fat. We have thresholds for saturated fat, total sugar, and sodium. And also the NPM also provides sets the stage for adoption of the subsequent policies, which is front of pack warning labeling, marketing restrictions, fiscal policies, and procurement of food in public institutions. So where we have come from is that initially the nutrient profile model had the red and green or symbols, and through these labels against the high-in labels, the NPM now has the black octagonal high-in label. So if you can see the red and green, what they contained was just either sugar or fat, and the idea was that if a product contains a red label, a red symbol, let's say saying sugar, that it was supposed to communicate to the consumer that that product had the sugar in excess levels. And if it had fat in green, then it meant that the fat were within the levels that were permitted. Now, this was causing confusion because it was possible for a product to contain both red and green labels at the same time, and without separating, without targeting just the nutrients of concern that are high and above the set thresholds. So the black high in octagonal symbols on the other side, on the other hand, you can see they indicate high in sugar or high in fat, high in total fat, or high in saturated fat. So these are the symbols that we now have in our NPM. And now what we are doing next is to develop regulations to operationalize and create an enforcement mechanism for the front of pack warning labels. So they'll be applicable across all products, prepackaged products. So we are currently developing regulations to operationalize that, a clear mechanism for and also learning from best practices across the different countries, because we want to have a strong basis for the gains from any challenge from the industry or other quarters. Then we also getting into an enhanced advocacy space, marketing restrictions as well. We are developing regulations on the same. So we are also looking at how we can strengthen the coalition, widen it, bring in more actors, of course, who are in the space. So partners, research, our voice. Then the technical working group engagements and collaboration also continuing. So part of what we are doing is that for each of these regulations, because it's now a legal process that will go through Parliament, we have developed what is required for the regulations to take off, including drafting instructions. We are also working on conducting regulatory impact assessment as part of what government requires. The Parliament will also require that for any regulatory process. Then, of course, CSOs are leading the process of monitoring any pushback and responding and mitigating any pushback that we may get from the industry to protect these policies that we are working on at the moment. So that is all from me, Kenneth. I have donated about 2 minutes of time. And yes, back to you.
Thanks so much, Celine, and that's why I'm smiling, because you have given us 2 minutes time, so we're still behind time, but not as behind time as we were. So I'm gonna swiftly hand the baton over to Canada, and Nadia, I know that you're up next and all waiting and ready for the early research on front of package warning labels in the Canadian system. So over to you.
Good morning, and thanks so much for the invitation. Today, I'll be sharing insights from the Canadian experience with front of package labeling based on previous work that I had the opportunity to contribute to. First, I would like to start with some background. So in Canada, 80% of all deaths are due to non-communicable diseases. And as we know, a healthy diet is one of the major risk factors for a range of NCDs. So Canadians' intakes of nutrients of public health concern exceeds recommended level. It's estimated that ultra-processed products contribute to nearly half of daily energy intake, and ultra-processed products are also the main source of free sugars in the Canadian diet, accounting for around 72% of intake. So diets are influenced by many factors, and one of them is the food environment. The Government of Canada has taken a number of actions to improve the Canadian food environment. And in 2016, Health Canada launched the Healthy Eating Strategy with the vision to make the healthier choice the easier choice for all Canadians. And as part of this strategy, it was recommended to implement mandatory front of package labeling. So we've been hearing a lot today about front of pack labeling. This policy has been recognized by public health organizations as a cost-effective policy to promote healthy diets. And the purpose of this policy is to quickly and clearly inform consumers about the excessive levels of nutrients of concern, using easy-to-interpret visuals to discourage the purchase of unhealthy products. So in Canada, the public consultation period for front of pack labeling took place between 2017 and 2018. The labels that you see here were basically promoted by the food industry, despite lacking evidence of their effectiveness in clearly informing consumers when a product is high in a nutrient of concern. In fact, this study showed that octagon labels were significantly more effective than the magnifying glass type labels at communicating high levels of nutrients of public health concern in a time-limited environment. So Health Canada published in 2022 front of pack labeling regulations that will require food and beverages that meet or exceed set thresholds for sodium, sugars, or saturated fat to display a high nutrition symbol on the front of the package. So there was also some exemptions that were included. For example, foods will be exempted from front of pack labeling regulations if they do not require to display a nutrition facts table, if they provide a protective effect on health, such as milk, eggs, fresh fruits, and vegetables, and also for foods where the high nutrition symbol will be redundant, such as honey, salt, and syrups. So with this, Canada joins the group of countries, mostly in the American regions, that have adopted a mandatory nutrient warning front of pack label approach. But before implementation takes effect, we wanted to explore what this would mean for products commonly consumed by Canadians and for the packaged food supply. So, using data from the Canadian Community Health Survey, we examined the proportion of products commonly consumed by Canadians that will display at least one front of pack label. And we found that 33% of foods usually consumed by Canadians adults will display a front of pack label. So in this graphic, you can see in red the proportion of foods consumed by Canadians that will display a front of pack label by food category. And in light red, the proportion of products within the same category that will display at least one fewer front of pack label. So we wanted to see what were the options for consumer within these categories that are usually consumed in Canada. So we can see that in food categories such as bakery products, combination dishes, dessert toppings and fillings, desserts and soups, more than 50% of products will display a front of pack labeling system. So then we looked at the packaged food supply. So using the data from the University of Toronto's Food Label Information and Price Program, also known as FLIP, we compared the Canadian front of pack labeling criteria with other front of pack labeling systems implemented across the Americas, so different MPMs. We also assess how well each system identify ultra-processed products. And as you can see here, every model has their own targeted nutrients, like Canada has sodium, sugars, and saturated fat. In Chile, they have also these nutrients, but also calories. In the Pan American Health Organization that has been adopted by Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia, adopted and adapted as well, have all these nutrients, but also trans fat, total fats, and non-sugar sweeteners. So what we found is that 54%, 66%, and 79% of food products will be required to display a front of package symbol for at least one nutrient of concern under the Canadian, Chilean, and PAHO nutrient profile model. So these results reflect a comparison across the three common nutrients used in all three systems. So we only limited to the three common nutrients. We know that Chile has another criteria, which is calories, and PAHO has trans fat, total fat, and non-sugar sweeteners. But to be fair in the comparison and just to see with these three nutrients, what would be the impact, we focus on this. But of course, we have more analysis comparing all the criteria. So you can see here in the graph, the blue side of the graph are products exempted under each criterion. In green, products with no front of pack label. Dark red, products displaying one front of pack label. Light red, products displaying two front of pack label. And at the top segment, you can see the percentage of products displaying three front of pack label. So what we also observed is that there was a greater alignment between the Chilean and the PAHO criteria than between the Canadian and the PAHO criteria. Okay, so when we look by nutrients of concern, we also compare this, and we see that the Canadian, Chilean, and PAHO front of pack labeling criteria will identify respectively 28%, 39%, and 49% of products as excessive in sodium, 24%, 34%, and 38% as excessive in sugars, and in saturated fat, it'll be 20%, 20%, and 32%. Now, but what does this mean if we look at specific food categories, right? When we look at the category level, especially for food categories that are top contributors of sodium, such as bakery products or combination dishes, and this is very specific to Canada, the PAHO nutrient profile model performs better at identifying products with high levels of sodium. And we know these are based on WHO nutrient intake goals. So our findings show that a significant proportion of these products will not be subject to front of pack labeling regulation under the Canadian criteria, in contrast to the PAHO criteria. A similar pattern is observed in top contributing food categories to sugar intake, such as dessert and packaged fruits and fruit juices. Now, let's see what happens when we only focus on the problematic ultra-processed products. First, we found that in our sample that was composed of packaged products, 72% were classified as NOVA 4 or ultra-processed products. It's important to highlight that this analysis only represents the packaged food supply. So unprocessed or minimally processed foods or NOVA 1 are underrepresented in this sample. And this is how our sample looks by food category. Categories composed mostly of ultra-processed products include desserts, dessert toppings and fillings, combination dishes, again, soups, meat and substitutes, bakery products, sugars and sweets, and beverages, so no surprising. Okay, so when focusing exclusively on ultra-processed products and applying the full set of parameters for each criteria, so the Canadian, the Chilean, and the PAHO, we found that 33% of ultra-processed products will not be regulated under the Canadian criteria. 18% will not be regulated under the Chilean criteria, and only 2% will not be regulated under the PAHO criteria. So this highlights how much more comprehensive the PAHO model is. And also I wanted to highlight that the inclusion of other sweeteners in addition to nutrients of concerns in the PAHO criteria significantly increase its ability to capture and regulate ultra-processed products. And as I mentioned earlier, the policy is set to take in effect in January 2026. But unfortunately, in 2024, a marketing authorization was introduced that changes things a little bit with a specific food category, which is the dairy-related products. Now, instead of needing the high in calcium to be exempted from front of pack labels, products only need to be source of calcium. So this means a lot more dairy products will be exempt, even if they are high in saturated fat or sodium. And that's important to highlight because while milk is the top source of calcium for Canadians, it's actually cheese it's a major contributor to saturated fat and sodium in the diet. So this exemption could really weaken the impact of the front of pack labeling policy. And of course, this exemption was heavily influenced by the food industry, and I'll show you an example. As in other countries we've seen, it's not surprised to hear about industry interference in healthy food policies, and this is one example from Canada. So using data from Health Canada's meeting and correspondence on healthy eating database, studies found that during the consultation period, there were 75 stakeholder meetings with Health Canada related to front of pack labeling regulations, and 57 of them were initiated by the food industry or trade associations. So, and after the policy was adopted, out of 22 front of pack labeling related meetings with Health Canada, 21 were initiated by the food industry and 8 specifically by the dairy farmers of Canada. So this level of engagement heavily influenced the decision to further exempt dairy products. And more recently, Health Canada released a policy statement indicating its intent to extend exemption to 2 additional products. So ready-to-eat breakfast cereals and prepackaged fresh coconut. So there are many things going on. We'll see what happens with the Canadian experience. The policy it's supposed to take an effect in January 2026. However, we are already seeing some products in the market with warning labels. And this is just my last slide, but I like to finish my presentation by showing this example. Some products in Canada are already displaying front of package warning labels. And you can see this energy drink shows a warning for being high in sugar, but also features a supplemented food claim endorsed by Health Canada. So this is highly problematic, right? As it sends mixed messages to consumers and it's very confusing. So products that display a warning label should not be able or should not be allowed to display nutrition, health, or supplemented food claims. So this is something that we'll also pay close attention and monitor as well in the packaged food supply in Canada. So I want to acknowledge the support of Professor Mary Labbé and her team at the University of Toronto for their contribution
Hi there, everyone. I think we're having some technical difficulties. I think the video may have ended prematurely. Let me hand over to Kenneth. I think
Sure,
we'll
Maisha.
continue with the
Okay, I
next
was just
presenter.
confirming that the technical difficulties were not on my end. And also I see that Chris has his camera on and is ready. So are we going to wait a few seconds to see, or should I just move on to Chris?
Let's check with Danielle.
Okay,
That was the end of the video.
it was okay. So it finished quite abruptly, but at least all the content was there. All right, so I'm now going to pass the baton over to the other side of the pond, to Chris, who's all lined up for the UK experience. Chris, over to you.
Kenneth, thanks so much. Let me share my PowerPoint. Restart my PowerPoint. Okay, is that working? It's very humbling to be here. I was asked, I think, to give the UK perspective. I think really the perspective I want to give is to learn from what we are doing and not do it. The only proposal I've heard that is worse than our system of ultra-processed food and food regulation in the UK that is worse is the QR code proposal. So that's kind of my pitch. I'm honored to be here. Kenneth, thank you for your kind words. And it's humbling to be on a panel with people that have mentored me and that I've worked with. So I'll talk a little bit about food in the UK. Instead of putting my declaration of interests up, I put up a QR code, really just to illustrate how difficult and obstructive that would be. Of course, I have got a slide on my actual conflicts. It's worth saying I sit on 2 WHO committees, I work with UNICEF, but I do make money from a book about the food system, and I do broadcasting for the BBC, as well as working as a doctor in London as an infection and global health doctor, and doing food systems work at UCL. So I have a bias, I hope not a conflict of interest, but definitely an interest. I barely need to underline this, but I want to say, I know there are some food industry friends on the call. I have friends who work in the food industry. Welcome. So some of what I'm going to say, I'm just going to underline what people have already said and try and be as clear as I can. Obesity and diet-related disease are commerciogenic. They're driven by financial incentives. They're caused by the availability and marketing of energy-dense foods that are high in saturated fat, sugar, and salt. These are also known as UPF. There's a big debate in the UK. I think there are very valid comparisons between food and tobacco companies in terms of their actions, their incentives, and regulatory approaches, and front of package warning labels is part of that. Large food corporations are unable to self-regulate. I do not know a single instance where they have done effective voluntary regulation. I think this is true of all large corporations. They require government intervention. And one of the crucial things that they do is they generate conflicts of interest to stall regulation. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about. Just a little bit of background for those of you not familiar with the UK or think that you might look to the UK as an example. We spend a quarter of our life in poor health in the UK. 10% of children are living with obesity by the age of 5, and a quarter of our kids by the age of 10 live with obesity. Obesity rates have gone up by 700%, severe obesity by 1,600%. This is in the last 30 years. We have been in a severe problem for a long time. The obesity goes hand in hand with stunting. So children in the UK are visibly shorter. If you travel from the UK to Northern Europe or Eastern Europe, and you look at children of the same size, if you went to a school, you would see they are this much shorter at the age of 5. So we're living in an emergency. It's a chronic emergency. I say emergency because it requires immediate action, even though it has needed immediate action for 20 years. So the big question, I think, is why are children eating excess calories, salt, fat, and sugar? I think everyone on the call knows the answer to this, but there is still a public debate around maybe they're not doing enough exercise. I won't go into this in detail. Almost all of the evidence around the promotion of exercise for maintenance of weight or for increasing calorie burn has been generated by the soft drinks industry, the food industry, but particularly Coca-Cola, and that's quite well established. Over the long term, exercise doesn't really increase energy expenditure in a meaningful way. The problem is with food. What about willpower? You can destroy the willpower argument in a number of ways. This is CDC data. Men, women, black, white, Hispanic populations. Everyone starts to gain weight, everyone of all ages, in the mid-70s. It's not to do with willpower. We don't have older Hispanic groups and Latino groups, and then young white population, everyone losing moral responsibility at the same time. That's not what happens. It's the food environment. What about stress, genes, trauma, poverty? We know that these things also drive gambling, alcohol consumption, cigarette use, other harmful behaviors. These populations are targeted. But the proximate cause of diet-related disease is industrially processed packaged goods that we call formally UPF. So how should we define it? We have long arguments in the UK because there's no perfect way of describing healthy and unhealthy food. We need different definitions for research and for policy, for consumers, for product level, for dietary patterns. You know, broccoli is healthy in one context, but if you're on a desert island, we'd all want the burger. In the UK, we have an incredibly confusing situation. I'm going to try and explain it, but if at the end of my explanation you're confused, that is fine. We have different definitions, as I say, for research versus policy, diets versus products. We have dietary guidance. We have traffic lights on the front of the pack. We have a thing called high fat, salt, sugar, which is a regulatory definition about broadcasting. And then we have a rising public understanding of UPF. The public are now very well aware of what UPF is. They've all heard of it, but government is not acting. So let's look at our dietary recommendations. They're pretty solid. Okay, you don't need to look at all these numbers, but our government produces a guide, the Eat Well Guide, with nutrient thresholds very much in line with what PAHO and WHO and other countries say. They're objective, they're internationally aligned, they're evidence-based, they are invisible. No one goes and looks at the data tables. So saying stick to the dietary tables is like saying, well, just quit cigarettes. It's difficult to comply with because of the food environment. So out in the food environment, we have traffic lights on the front of packets. This is the traffic lights for Kellogg's Cocoa Pops. I'm sure whatever country you're in, you have an equivalent chocolate-covered cereal. It gets 2 green and 2 orange traffic lights, which would signal to me as a consumer that this is basically a fairly healthy product, certainly acceptable for children. It's completely misaligned with dietary guidance. Our traffic lights have nothing to do with government dietary guidance, nothing to do with that high-fat, salt, sugar definition. Traffic lights identify fewer than 50% of foods that are actually high in fat, salt, and sugar, according to our guidance. For example, 17% of the calories in Cocoa Pops come from sugar. Our dietary guidance says no more than 5% should come from free sugars. And yet the traffic light, as you see, is merely amber, not red. So our traffic lights are a worse system in general, but they're also not linked to our national guidance. There's incoherence. And there is no way of telling from the nutritional information on a package of children's food, which that food advertised with the monkey definitely is, how much and how often my daughter Lyra there should eat. And of course, lots of products that we would all agree are not healthy get multiple green traffic lights there. The Coca-Cola, the red traffic light's invisible, and it gets 3 green. So it's 75% healthy according to the traffic lights. That's a can of sugary Coca-Cola. We then have, so we got traffic lights, guidance. We then have this high fat, salt, sugar definition, which you might assume would apply to foods that are high in fat or salt or sugar according to our nutritional guidance. In fact, whether a product is high fat, salt, sugar, it's a binary distinction. It either is or isn't. And you work it out with a complicated calculation that is somewhat subjective. It's a multi-step process. And so you can have products that are high in fat, salt, and sugar, but are not called HFSS and thus can be marketed to children. So once a food is designated HFSS, there are marketing restrictions put on it. Again, HFSS identifies very few foods that are high in fat, salt, and sugar according to guidance. And both Nutella and Cocoa Pops are not high fat, salt, sugar products. So HFSS only applies to quite a limited number of products. Chocolate spreads are exempt, no matter how much salt, fat, and sugar in them. Our government regulators have said UPF is just HFSS. It's covered by existing regulations. Other people have talked about the UPF evidence. I'll go through this. We have greater than 32 systematic reviews or meta-analyses. This is an analysis done by a former PhD student showing that when you adjust in the epidemiological studies for fat, salt, and sugar, the effects remain the same on health. And it satisfies all of the Bradford Hill criteria, the formal criteria that we use to establish causality. So there is no debate really, and I'm sure everyone on this call is broadly in agreement with this, that ultra-processed food causes negative health outcomes. Plausibility is an important part of the Bradford Hill criteria. And in terms of making this argument, we have to say, is it plausible that industrially processed foods made for profit, made for financial growth, would not cause, for example, weight gain? Especially when we know that ultra-processed food is developed by some companies using functional magnetic resonance imaging to optimize product development. We know some of the biggest food companies have done this, and that's on the record for Pepsi and Unilever. And focus groups optimize every aspect of every product. And the purpose of the food is to generate financial growth, as I say. So the evidence for UPF, the reason I put that there is because the evidence is explanatory. It tells us where the problem is coming from. It shows us that the purpose of processing is important, and it tells us the companies and products that we need to regulate. The definition used in the academic literature to define ultra-processed food, Nova Group 4, may not be quite appropriate for product level regulation. In the UK, we have a lot of products that aren't quite ultra processed. They don't quite meet the definition, but functionally they are the same. So the ambition is to regulate UPF and UPF-like products. So I'm going to show you some unpublished data, very similar to some of the data that we've just seen. And this is some work I've been doing with Fabio and my group at UCL. And we asked what percentage of ultra-processed food products would be identified as unhealthy using different nutrient profile models, including our own government guidance. So if we use the thresholds in our government guidance, we find that 98% of ultra-processed products, in fact, slightly over, if we look at levels of saturated fat, free sugars, sodium, total fat, and energy, 98% of ultra-processed food products would get a label. So that government claim that it's covered by existing regulation seems to be inaccurate. If we just use fat, sugars, salt, and total fat, we see it's almost 95%. And we can label 91% of ultra-processed food using saturated fat, free sugar, and sodium. So almost all ultra-processed food has excess energy, fat, free sugars, or saturated fat or sodium, according to our government guidance. And yet using this HFSS designation, we see we can only label 57% of those products, and using the traffic lights, less than half of ultra-processed products get a warning traffic light. So our labeling systems and our regulatory tools are incoherent with each other, and they are totally misaligned with dietary guidance. And it seems to me obvious we should use the good nutrient profile based on our UK dietary guidance to regulate harmful food. So in terms of plausibility, it's really important to say, some people say the UPF definition is too broad. It includes healthy products. In fact, we know that isn't true, and we've seen that multiple people today have said this. More than 98% of UPF has a harmful nutrient profile. Why is there an ongoing debate in the UK? Because almost every single institution that might regulate or advocate for UPF regulation has financial conflicts of interest with the companies that make and sell UPF. These headlines appeared out of a press conference. 5 scientists were at the press conference. 4 had existing significant conflicts with the food industry. The press conference was held by the Science Media Center, which is funded in, amongst others, what was at the time by Nestle, Procter & Gamble, and Food Drink Europe. So that's our biggest press office. Our biggest food charity is funded by almost every major food corporation you can name, and their Healthy Eating Week in 2023 was sponsored by Coca-Cola. I don't think you can credibly claim to be a nutrition charity and have your Healthy Eating Week sponsored by Coke. Our UK Research and Innovation, our big government research fund, is doing an investigation. They're doing a public dialogue. The membership group of that public dialogue, the oversight group, has people with conflicts of interest with those companies. And our government regulator at DEFRA, the new food committee, is co-chaired by industry and government. So industry sits not just at the table, they are equal with government. They're in the secretariat, and those are some of the corporations there. And finally, our Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, who define a healthy diet for the UK. An investigation by the British Medical Journal revealed that 65% of the members of that committee have conflicts of interest. And then there are people like me. So as well as being a physician and academic, I have a public profile, and I get emails like this from McDonald's inviting me. This was from someone in menu development, saying they were keen for an inspirational, thought-provoking, but realistic ambassador on food and nutrition. I'm proud to not speak to you today as an ambassador for McDonald's. Policy principles, Kenneth brought this out. The argument we must make is we are there to improve justice, equity, and choice. Reformulation, yes, it's probably better to reformulate, but really I see these regulations as about changing a dietary pattern and regulating corporate power. So the most important policy proposal to me is to end the conflicts of interest. Unless we do that, all the other technical stuff, which will write itself, is very unlikely to happen. But the first step is these mandatory warning labels that everyone has talked about, in my view. And we can do it in the UK using our existing guidance, and then see that Octagon Food would be subject to all these other marketing regulations, exactly as Simone and others have pointed out. Fabio mocked up some of our products. We have products like this, which using the kind of policies used in Mexico or Chile, we would see if we used our guidance, the cartoon character come off, warning labels go on. The same with Cocoa Pops, the same with these products that aren't necessarily ultra processed. They'd still get warning labels on them, and we'd see prominent warning labels. So those are my kind of main, the main proposal is to end the conflicts of interest in order to pave the way for the octagons, and to remember that the interests of these companies are really not aligned with public health. We see even when senior people at the companies sincerely want to make the companies better, they are ousted by activist investors. A quote from someone at BlackRock: these companies are not in control of their business models. The UNICEF proposal I've put there, that's their conflict of interest policy. I'll leave you with the thought that until we frame the problem of diet-related diseases driven by commercial incentives, we will not solve it. Thank you very much, and thanks to all my collaborators.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thanks so much for that presentation. It was interesting hearing your comments about Mickey D's. I'll share some privately with you after this session. So, panelists, you have done a fantastic job in bringing us this information. I know we don't have a lot of time for questions, but I really do want to take this question that has been unanswered. And I know that most questions have already been answered by yourselves in the Q&A section. I also I see a comment, looks like a comment here from CrossQ, and I'm just going to ask them to maybe state what particularly the question is, because we're not going to have time to hear from live presentations. But I want to ask all the panelists this, maybe weigh in on it. So it's been several years since the process began in 2017, and given the clear concerns in front of package warning labels embedded with QR codes as has been proposed, this approach does not appear feasible. What really is the strategy for the Caribbean going forward? I mean, where do we go from here? Maisha, I see your camera on, and I see Chris's camera on. I know there's going to be some words of advice as well, but I want to hear where do we take this from here now moving forward in the Caribbean region?
Hey, Kenneth, thanks. And I think my response will be very much from the advocates' perspective, from civil society. And I think I mentioned at the end of our presentation that we'll continue to advocate for the octagonal warning labels. I want to pick up on Chris's point in his presentation around protecting the process from industry interference. And what we've found with a lot of the work that we've been doing is that we really need to place our efforts on strengthening those governance mechanisms so that we can hold the process to account. We find at a country level, there's an imbalance around stakeholder representation in the National Merit Committees skewed towards private sector actors who may have commercially driven interests. So we have a lot of work to do on those decision-making boards to ensure that there is a strong public health presence and that the other stakeholders are really making decisions based on the best evidence. And I think the other key point too, which we've been trying to do, is to really build public support. And we don't have the pockets that the industry does to reach the kind of broad population, but we'll continue to do that and try to be innovative. And I think one of the really successful arms we've had, and we mentioned that as well, as the youth arm, and really trying to build that youth awareness and youth support and youth indignation around how kind of the industry targets them with their products. those are my initial thoughts in terms of the regional process. That's really led by, you know, the regional machinery around where they'll go next, how they take feedback, you know, how they use the science. That will be led at the regional level. And we just continue to play our role as advocates, really trying to push the warning label and holding the system to account.
Sure. Thanks, Maisha. Any other takers for that question? What are the next steps for the Caribbean region? Even if you're outside the region, you can give your recommendations for the next step for the region as well. Chris, go ahead.
I just say, I mean, I'm so admiring of the steps you've already seen. I saw some of the youth campaign posters saying, I think the word you deserve was a phrase that was used, you deserve to be protected. Our youth campaigns in the UK have been very successful at partnering with the food industry, and all the way through at every level, from our charities, industry have portrayed themselves as part of the solution, as on the side of change. They co-opt everyone. So I think protecting the young people, they're so easily absorbed into an industrial process, and creating some degree of cultural shame about it. I think you are so far ahead of us. So it's more going, I'm going to take that back here.
Great. Yeah, you know, I experienced this firsthand in the Faculty of Medical Sciences here. It's extremely difficult, almost impossible for a faculty member to enter the space with a Coca-Cola, because some medical student, they're going to be called out on it. And that whole behavioral change has really only occurred within the last 2 years. And many of them are Healthy Caribbean advocates and Heart and Stroke Foundation advocates. But just seeing that they're so intolerant of it, I mean, you know, and we have had faculty members in the past saying, well, you know, it's my right to have a Coke. But then no one wants to go through a lecture by a group of students basically bombarding you, right? So that behavioral change is palpable, right? Anyone else has anything else further to add on the next steps? How do we get past this in the Caribbean region? If not, so go ahead, Fabio.
I think Arthur and Nadia were before me, so go ahead, Arthur or Nadia.
Thank you,
All
Fab.
right, okay.
Thank you, everyone. And apologies for that. I'm traveling right now. I just got to my hotel, so thank you so much for the invitation. I just wanted to comment on the nutrient profile model and the importance of having a strong evidence-based nutrient profiling model. Well, we are seeing that in many countries where we work, there are many pushbacks in terms of like the categories that are going to be included. You know, the idea in ideal scenarios that you can cover the whole packaged food supply with a nutrient profile model that can inform other policies, not just front of pack labeling, but, you know, then you can use it for marketing restrictions, fiscal policies, school food environments, etc. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that brief intervention, but important intervention. So Arthur, I see your hand up. It's looking a bit cyanotic, so go ahead.
Sure. Thanks. Just wanted to say really quickly that I think we need to be honest with ourselves and with our various stakeholders about the structure and the ability of the existing structures to take us to the place of centering and prioritizing health and advancing health. And if we are convinced of that, then we need to engage with a political process, because ultimately it's a political process that is supposed to own the standards process and the way that standards process works. And I think that is sort of where I am. Can this process get us to where we're going? And if it can't, then that needs to be very clearly communicated, and we need to then map another process, because ultimately the goal is health. The goal is not just consensus from people who have totally different aims.
Thanks, Arthur. I know we're out of time, but I really want to hear closing shots from Fabio, who's just raised his hand. Go ahead, Fabio.
Yeah, no, so I think one of the things that's clear from previous, from experience from other countries that have succeeded in moving forward, one is making sure, as Chris was saying, that the policy process is safeguarded from conflicts of interest. And there will be an opportunity, and it's necessary to hear all stakeholders. But at the moment that the decision, this is a public health measure, and it needs to be taken, the decision needs to be taken based on public health evidence and recommendations. Even from a legal and international law and trade perspective, it is important that public health measures are taken based on public health recommendations and evidence. So from our the other thing is that some countries may be in a different step or in a different momentum to take those measures. So it is also important to recognize that maybe some countries will need to move forward before the others and inspire the others, and from their learnings, from their experience, help other countries from the regions or sub-region to evolve on what they're doing. It's hard to come up with, usually very hard to come up with their own agreement by all countries at different steps to have one a single approach, although this is ideal. But while this is taking place, countries can and have been moving forward in other integration mechanisms to adopt these policies to protect their population, and then the other countries start to learn from that, and the whole region starts to move together. So I think that's one of the key lessons from other countries. How can we protect that, strengthen the basis of recommendations, and also advance and take the steps that are needed. Just finally, there was a question about how you can make that gradually. So most of the countries have gradually required and enforced those legislations. So it's not that when you adopt a front of pack labeling, the next day or overnight, all companies need to put the warnings, and products coming and being shipped into the countries need to change. There's time for that, and there's always going to be a requirement, and that will always be considered. So all countries have done that, and they've worked, and they receive products from all over the world, and there's no issue, no stopping of international trade because of those warnings. So in that sense, it's very reassuring that countries will be moving in a good direction as well, in terms of international trade too.
Thanks so much, Fabio. Would you believe it? We are actually out of time, but I do have some final thoughts here that really resonate all that you said as such a brilliant panel. One is public health must take precedent. We have done this in every threat to public health, whether it's an infectious disease. We have the luxury of the non-communicable diseases that they don't seem to be as urgent, but they are. And therefore, change in the environment is so critical. That change in the environment cannot be contaminated by other interests, because public health interests must always take precedent. We, as healthcare providers and practitioners and in the public health space, we have a duty to have an independent voice, make sure that we're also not contaminated by the influence of the unhealthy food industry. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been watching, whether it's morning or afternoon where you are, the global updates on front of package warning labeling by the Healthy Caribbean Coalition. I've had the honor of chairing this session with a fantastic panel. The conversation, the best part, I'm sure will continue after the meeting. You're going to miss. But I want to invite all the panelists and all of the team, really, such a tremendous team who's been part of this, to remain on so we can have our group photo. So those of you wearing a tie like me, you get the straight in your tie. Those of you not wearing a tie, you just get the smile like Chris. And get your best camera shot on. And I don't have to address the hair issue, but I'll let Sheena or Danielle take a photo. Let me know when it's good, when we're good to go.